Amal, Asha, Siwang, l'espoir. Anyone familiar with any of these words? A few, nice. There are different ways of saying it, and in turn, different ways of how we come to interpret it. But its usefulness remains. Especially today, more than ever, the word is hope. Most of my generation is angry. And yes, I'm angry about the world too. It seems these days more often than not. I'm distraught when I see the image of a Syrian man holding the dead body of his daughter. I'm distraught when I see that powerful countries stand by and do absolutely nothing but watch the horrors unfold in places that sometimes seem like they're so far away. I'm distraught when peaceful protests call for an end to an injustice, but still nothing is done. I'm in fact ashamed to call myself a human being in a time where the word humanity seems to be meaningless. For a lot of us young people, we might send a tweet here, share a Facebook post there, maybe even attend a protest or a vigil. But even then, there are those days where you feel it's not enough. You think, what can I really do? What's the point? Are my actions even going to make a difference? And there's been increasing research in this field. A recent study showed that millennials from across various liberal democracies have lost faith in the democratic system, and we've become more cynical towards democracy than the generations before us. And this, in turn, has led to us being less and less involved with politics and less involved with global affairs. Now, that's just something to think about. In a time where it's so easy to be cynical and pessimistic, what we need is to use our voices through solidarity and empathy. We can criticize and be angry, but what the world needs is hope, because that is what leads to action. And through the tools of solidarity and hope, we can utilize proactivity. And that is key here. So as someone who's been labeled a youth advocate and an activist for most of my life, I've thought about this often, from politics to international development to social justice causes across the globe, and how for basically all of us, especially young people, it really feels like we're living in a time where we're at the edge of the end. Peter Benenson. Does that name ring a bell? Might not, so don't worry. But in 1961, he was shocked when he learned about 2 Portuguese students being sentenced to 7 years in prison unjustly. So he thought about his own positionality and what he could do. And he was proactive in getting a small group of peers together, and they started writing letters in support of these students. And this soon became a letter-writing campaign, and today has come to be known as what we all know as Amnesty International. So that's great. He had a cause. And maybe all of us here today have a cause as well. Or maybe you don't. Maybe you see and hear what's happening, and you feel passionate to do something in that moment. But then the motivation goes away. Think about that. Reading an article about a group persecuted in Yemen and thinking how horrific it must be for those children, but then moving on with our lives. Seeing that image of a young Syrian boy washed up on shore, but then forgetting his name and forgetting his story. Reading a Facebook post about an innocent 15-year-old shot to death in some American city by the people that were supposed to serve and protect him. But then we carry on about our days, grocery shopping, meeting up for coffee with that friend or colleague you haven't seen for a while. So we are guilty of how we use our memory. But of course, it can become exhausting too. Exhausting of trying to raise awareness on the plight of people all over the world, where it feels like there's always something that you'd want changed. But that is exactly why we need hope. That is exactly why we must continue to try. We are guilty of how we use our memory. That's why the slide is empty. But, of course, there are things we can do. The first step is to think about your own positionality. If you don't know what's happening with the examples I gave just now, I urge you to look it up tonight. If you don't know what's happening in Myanmar right now, I urge you to do some research tonight. If you kind of know what's happening somewhere, even in your own communities, I urge you to do some further research tonight. You're not going to become an expert per se, but in having fuller knowledge of a situation, including context and complexities involved, you will have now taken the first steps towards change. And the process is quite simple. First, like I said, think about your own position with the matter at hand. And then think about what it is in your capacity to do something. Because, of course, we're not all going to go off and create our own Amnesty Internationals and Red Crosses of the world, but maybe you'll volunteer for them, even if it's just for a day. And in doing something through these avenues, you will have utilized proactivity. The key here is to be able to discuss the issue with people, teach others, and maybe even come up with your own ways to help realistically. And that's what's key to being a change maker. Because of my experiences, I guess, in working with marginalized people, I recently created a nonprofit organization with my siblings. It's called Global Youth Impact, GYI for short. Now, the work that we were doing gained a lot of attention in just its first few months that we created this NPO, specifically because it was geared towards young people leading the way on critical issues. And some of our work actually led to our selection as a delegation to the United Nations Youth Assembly in its headquarters in New York just last year. So with that, I'd like to leave you with a story. Does anyone recognize these images? Not a lot, but a few. So a couple years ago, on April 24th, this building, which was a factory for garment workers, came crashing down on April 24th because of horrible structural and working conditions. When it first happened, there were massive media reports across the West, and people were shocked and horrified to find out that it was big brand names, some of which we might be wearing right now, that were the cause of the conditions that led to this incident. But then, attention started to fade. This got me upset. This was the Rana Plaza factory collapse in Bangladesh, and it didn't happen too long ago. So my group, GYI, became a part of this ongoing campaign collectively with other people, organizations, NGOs, labor unions, active citizens, basically people who all saw this incident and thought, we have to do something. So we worked to pressure these companies to give the victims the $30 million that they were owed. It took time, that's for sure, but we didn't lose hope throughout what felt like forever. And to date, there's now been about $28 million that's been paid off. That's a pretty big achievement. So now all of us weren't necessarily working collectively, but we all had that same vision, and we were all doing different things. My group launched talks, workshops, people were fundraising, there were different things happening. And it was people from all kinds of backgrounds. So here it was the power of hope and solidarity combined. It was folks just like you and me who all had a vision for change. We didn't lose hope, and we were proactive towards achieving whatever it is that we wanted. And the success of this story is a reminder that we as young people and simply as human beings really can have an impact. Now, this talk was not meant to be all flowers and rainbows and we can all hold hands and change the world together. But it was meant to be practical, and it was meant to be motivating. In a time, right now, where we're living, where it's so easy to be pessimistic, with the state of the world today, what we need to use is our ability to be hopeful and to channel that into something palpable. It doesn't have to be something huge. It can simply be educating yourself on something, and then in turn using that knowledge to raise awareness on an issue, local or global, that might seem simple on the surface. We're not all here to change the world, but we can do some small part. Think about your position and find something at your capacity. Because if we're not being hopeful, we're being wasteful. And with that, I hope that the next opportunity you're given, you remind yourself of that weapon that you hold as a human being, your ability to be hopeful and to do something with it. Thank you.